Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Reskilling and Talent Mobility, 3 Key Ideas for Greater Learning Outcomes. Today's session is brought to you in partnership by Open Sesame and eLearning Brothers. Open Sesame helps develop the world's most productive and admired workforces through powerful online learning in every industry. With the most comprehensive catalog of e-learning courses from the world's top publishers, Open Sesame helps global companies every step of the way, from finding courses, mapping them to your core competencies, and syncing them with your LMS, to increasing utilization and improving your L&D programs. And eLearning Brothers is a leader in learning technology solutions that enable organizations to conquer performance and development challenges. The company offers a one-stop shop for learning and development and delivery, ranging from strategic consulting and custom learning development to content libraries and development tools for creating rockstar learning experiences, all paired with an easy-to-use platform for delivering and tracking learning. eLearning Brothers helps everyone create and deliver learning experiences that rock and deliver measurable results. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants after the webinar in a couple of days. So you're all automatically muted, but we would still love to hear from you. Please feel free to use that chat bar. Maybe send in where you're coming in from today, where you're joining, whether it's the morning or afternoon for some. And then as you log in, say hello. And then closed captioning is enabled for this webinar. Just click the closed caption button to start viewing captions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to today's presenter, Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research and Advisory, Ben Eubanks. Over to you, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you, Paige. Appreciate it. And hey, everybody, so glad to have you here. Looking forward to a great conversation. Looking forward to sharing some ideas and insights and inspiration with you as we go. It's going to be a ton of fun. And so we've already kind of started priming you a little bit to engage in the chat, because I'll ask some questions as we go through, allow you to chime in, allow you to share your thoughts and share your perspectives. And I want to learn from you. I want to learn from each other as well as we're going through this. So I want to be interactive, engaging. And again, I'll share some good data with you, but also a lot of stories and examples. And I'll start off one of those right now. So one of the hardest lessons that I learned early in my career, so before I was a research nerd, I'll admit it, I was actually a practitioner in the trenches and learning and talent in HR, and I did that work day to day. I learned some lessons early on in my career that applied all through that. And one of the very earliest things, years and years ago, I was a teenager, we had a storm come through and it blew off a piece of the siding on top of a building that my father owned, about where I put the circle here on the picture so you can kind of imagine that. And he said, hey, I need someone to fix that. And let me tell you, we'll talk about skills today. We'll talk about, the things and capabilities people have. Fixing things is not one of the skills that I have. And I will admit that one right here for all of you to see. That is not something that I was blessed with. Well, I said, of course, let me give it a shot. Let me see what I can do. So I go over there, I get my tools, and I go to put the ladder against the side of the building, and it won't even reach the edge of the roof. I'm already failing, and I haven't started this yet. So I figure out that if I open the big side door, I can drive the truck inside, put the ladder in the back of the truck. You can tell this is getting scary already. Put the ladder in the back of the truck and climb out onto the roof. And I pull the materials out and I patch the hole. And I'm thinking, this is brilliant. I have accomplished this thing. I didn't think I could do this, and I did. I can't wait to go tell everybody about how amazing this looks. And it looks good as new. And then I realized that I just patched the hole that I climbed out onto the roof from. And so I could not get back down and go tell everybody about this story of victory. And so I started debating what was I going to do. Could I, open this up, climb back down? Do I jump off the roof? Like, what do I do? And eventually, obviously, I got down. But I tell that story because it's my reminder that when we solve one problem, when I patch that hole, we might create other ones. And the last year, we've seen, hey, we've solved this problem. We've moved to virtual, but now we can't get anyone to engage. Or we've solved this thing, but now we have that issue. And so as we're going through today, I want to talk to you about some of those issues and challenges based on the research we have that leaders like you responded, saying, these are the problems we're facing. These are the skill gaps we have inside our teams. This is how we're trying to solve these problems. We'll also share with you some perspectives on the learner side, the things they need from us, how they want us to serve them and support them from a learning and talent development perspective. And so we'll share some of those kind of things as we go through. Hopefully, as we're solving these problems, we don't create new ones, but if we do, it'll help us to think through how to do that logically. So really quick about me. I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm a researcher. I spend my days trying to understand how the world works. On the technology side, we look at the technology and service providers across all of learning to understand how they're doing what they're doing and who has what expertise, things like that. We also do research like you'll see today around trends, best practices, competitive intelligence, and how to solve the problems that we are faced with on a daily basis. Because oftentimes it's easy for us to get stuck, heads down, focused on the things we have to get done. And we realize that, oh goodness, while we were focusing on this thing, something popped up over there. I've written a book on AI and how it solves HR and learning and talent problems, which sounds like a dry textbook, but it's really a book about how to make work more human through the use of technology. And I'll touch on a little bit of that today in the conversation as we get to it. And last but not least, I run a podcast. I run a live stream show called HR Tech Talks and talk to talent and learning and HR providers that are in the space to understand what they do and how they do it. So I have a lot of fun sharing and learning and just growing alongside all of you. Today, we're going to look at this big study we did this year on learning and development and upskilling and mobility and all those kinds of things. It all wraps together. And this doesn't just come from our perspective, because as I mentioned, sometimes we get our tunnel vision. We think that the way to solve all problems is with the tools that we have at hand. And sometimes we need a different perspective to help us see the problems a little differently. So I'm going to share with you this research that has more than 1,000 companies, 1,000 leaders like yourself that responded to this. We're also going to pull in responses from the learners we serve. We're going to hear about what they're thinking, what their priorities are, how they want to develop and grow, because it'll give us some ideas that we may not have just in our own discussions. If you and I were sitting together, chatting at an event together, having a drink and just talking shop about what we're facing, what we're seeing, and the big challenges that are going on in our organizations right now, we might not see the same things from that perspective as what the learners are seeing. So the big picture for the discussion today, number one, we're going to dive into what they're saying, what the learners are saying. We actually have some brand new data I'm going to pull into this and share with you. This hasn't been published anywhere, so I'll share some of those things with you as we go and tap into that and share some of those insights, because I think it's really insightful. It's encouraging in some places. In other places, it's just like we've got to know this stuff, or we're gonna trip because we don't see where those stumbling blocks might be. So we're going to talk through their perspectives first. Then we're going to come back to your perspectives as learning and talent leaders. We're going to look at what tech gaps you said you've seen in the last year, what skill gaps you're seeing, and how to solve those and shore those up in your own teams, not just skills as an organizational conversation, because that does matter, but the skills on our own teams. Because I don't know about you, but I've always felt like when I worked in the space, all of our attention is everywhere else. And if we have any effort and we have any creativity, if we have any of those things left, then we turn it to our own needs, our own team. And I'm going to encourage you to think about yourself, kind of put the mask on first before you help someone else in that perspective. And then we'll talk about employee mobility and ownership in that last piece today. One of the things in our research that was especially telling and an opportunity for us as well to solve for some of the big challenges that companies are facing right now. If you're in learning, you likely are. If you're in learning, you might be firewalled off or a little bit from some of the conversations that are happening around the challenges in hiring. But I'll share with you some things right there that are happening where you can help solve this problem that someone else thinks you might be on the outside of, and allow you to come in and put your superhero cape on and help to save the day potentially. So it's going to be a ton of fun. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing from you as we go. And I'll give you some chances to chime in and share with me and add some context and ask some questions and all those kinds of things. I don't want to be just talking straight at you for the next 50 minutes or so. I want to hear from you as well as we go. So first up, let's get inside our learners' heads. Let's find out what they're thinking. Let's find out what their priorities are, because they have a unique perspective on the world. And like it or not, it's kind of an employee's market today. It's a candidate's market. If we create too much friction, we don't do the right things, then we may end up losing those people that we really need to be able to serve our customers in the moment. So let me start off, and I'll tell you, I'm a researcher. I admit that fully. You knew that probably when you showed up here. I don't have a ton of charts to show you today because I try not to overwhelm people with those. I'll share a couple of them as we go, but I'd rather enable you with some stories and some examples than just showing you a bunch of data. But this is the first one. It is a chart, and I'll share this with you just to give you some perspective here. So we asked in this study, who is responsible for someone's career development, for their growth, for picking up new skills? Who is responsible for those things? And I'm going to show you two different perspectives, one from us as the employers and the business leaders, and one perspective from the learners and how they feel about this. So the first one up, this is our perspective. From an employer side, this is how we feel about it. It's going to share responsibility across employee, primarily managers, HR, training. Watch this. When we flip over to the learner perspective here, the dark blue, they feel most responsible for themselves, whereas we feel most responsible for ourselves, which I think is an interesting perspective in this. I'm sharing this to help you see this as we go through. I'll reiterate it, that this is easy to feel like all of the solutions for this should be on our shoulders. And you can see in the data, we primarily put this emphasis on our shoulders. Right? We put a lot more on us than the employee does. This is a shared responsibility. In fact, for high-performing companies, they are much more likely than low-performing companies to say that this should be a shared responsibility. A low performer is more likely to say, the employee should figure it out. A high-performing company says, no. This is on us to create the right structure. It's on their managers to have better conversations. It's on the employees to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm ready for something else, or I'm ready to pick up a new skill, or I'm going to take some initiative. But it's not on any one group specifically to make this possible. But watch what happens in the data. And we cut this by a key question in the study. We cut this by a key question and we find something really intriguing. One of the questions we asked people is, have you ever left a job because you did not see or feel like you were moving up or growing inside the business? Did you feel like your development was stagnant? Those people that said, yes, I have left a job because of that, because I felt like I was never going to grow or never going to improve, those people put even higher emphasis on every single stakeholder group. You can see here kind of the middle column. They put even higher emphasis on every single stakeholder group. Why? Because they have exercised that nuclear option at some point in their career. They said, I'm not moving up, and so I'm going to hit the eject button and I'm going to escape. And while right now the headlines make that sound like something very flippant and something that people just do on a whim, the research we have shows that people, that is their last resort. They would like to, if they joined the company, they would like to make things work out. But if they don't feel like they have another option, the only other choice is, I've got to bail and find someone else that will help me develop, because the company I'm at is not going to help me. So just a reminder there, if someone has left that job previously, they've already exercised that, they are going to put an even greater onus and burden on us, on themselves, on managers to make sure that that is a priority. We're talking about, you can't open up the news without seeing something about the Great Resignation right now. I hate the term. We're using the term the Great reprioritization. It's harder to say, but it actually reflects what we're seeing in the research, that people have said, you know what, suddenly this thing that was important to me isn't important anymore. Or I've decided the things that are important to me are now these things instead. And it could be someone's growth and development, we're talking about here. It could be someone's family, work-life balance. It could be something else. What we saw, though, in the research is that 88% of people, 88%. So if you lined up 10 of your learners, approximately 9 out of 10 of them said, I would stay at a job longer if I had the right development opportunities in front of me. If my company actually helped me to see what sort of paths are there, what sort of options are there, my choose your own adventure, if you will. I used to love those books as a kid. If my company helps me see what those opportunities are, I will be more likely to stick around there. And this isn't, by the way, this isn't data from 10 years ago or 5 years ago. This data is from 2 or 3 months ago. This is from this summer. So brand new, in the middle of all the things we're facing, this is what your learners are saying. If you can help me see what opportunities are there, if you can help me see how I can develop, help me paint that picture, that vision for what my career looks like at this company, I'll tell you the truth. If you don't help them paint that picture, the competition will. When that recruiter calls them and tells them about the great opportunity they have for them at the other company across the street, they'll paint that picture of the future there and the opportunities. They'll make it look very bright and wonderful. We had the opportunity, though, to do that. One way we can do that is by helping our people know what matters, what skills actually matter for the work they're trying to do and for the place they want to go, career-wise. In the data, we saw that the majority of employers said, we expect our managers to tell our people what skills matter. We expect our managers to take this role, this active participation in this process. This can't all be on us. I already mentioned that earlier. We have a limited and finite amount of time. We can't walk around behind every manager saying, and make sure you do that, and make sure you tell them this. We can't do those things. So we've got to have them play along with us as partners. I'm going to tell you a great story in a minute of one of the best leaders I ever saw doing that. We've got to encourage them to do that, though. But the research shows that only 4 learners out of 10 are getting that from their managers right now. The other 6 out of 10 are saying, I don't really know what skills matter. I don't know if I'm on the right path. I don't know if I'm on the right track. I don't know if this is where we're going as a company or as a team. I feel kind of on my own here. And I actually just recently worked with the Obsessing team on this infographic kind of shares some of this research, and it was called Learners Feel Like They're on Their Own, because several of the data points showed that while we think everybody has this clear picture of all the great work we're doing, and you're working your tail off to make these things work and to align with the business and to create high quality content and to find the right solutions. And it turns out that many of those things aren't hitting in the right ways of the learners, or they're not perceiving those in the right way. And part of that's not on you, that's on their managers aren't helping to enable that. Let me tell you a quick story about one of the greatest leaders I ever had the pleasure of working with. And it's a fun story because I'll tell you, I've been telling Antoine's story for 6 or 7 years on and off in different events and things like that. And I actually had a chance about a year ago. I worked with him 10 plus years ago. I had a chance a year ago to run across him and said, hey, by the way, you probably don't know this, but I'm telling the story, and he was blown away. It's just a humble and amazing guy. So years ago, the very first job I ever had, I was in charge of keeping up with training records and making sure people were enrolling in the right courses and all those fun things. And I started doing some turnover analysis at the company to try to understand what was making people leave, because we had about 600 employees and about 50% turnover every year. Goodness, lots of enrollments and unenrollments on the LMS side, you can believe me. So I went and started looking at the data, and I realized that 50% turnover had some highs and some lows. One group had about 70% a year. I don't know how they even operated and kept the doors open. There was one group, though, that had about 10% turnover a year. And I was astounded, like, what is this person doing? I went and looked, and it was Antoine's region, his division that he was working as the division head for. And so I went to sort of a ride along with him to learn, what is he doing? How is he doing this? Because he's done something, he solved this problem that everybody else, is struggling with. I want to understand what he's doing. And interestingly enough, we were doing developmentally, we were providing direct care for the mentally ill and developmentally disabled. So a really tough job. It didn't pay very much. And again, his turnover was lower than everybody else. And he had some of the most challenging clients we had to work with. And so it was an opportunity to go see this. And one of the things that I found, just a quick example of his style and his approach, is when someone came on as a new hire, they got a letter. And imagine starting a job at $7.50 an hour. Most of you are like, hey, show up, get to work. Right? That's how I was when I worked at that kind of pay rate all those years ago. When people showed up, he sat down with them, looked in the eye, he gave them a letter that he had signed, and it essentially said, I'm so glad to have you here on my team. I saw something special in you. I can't wait for you to show up and shine and be amazing in this job. I know you're going to contribute mightily to this team, and I can't wait to help you grow as you go along. And that's paraphrasing. I've got the full letter. If you want to see that, my email's at the end. You can ping me. I'll send you the letter. But that was the essential pieces of that. And that painted this beautiful picture of, we are here together. I'm locking arms with you. I'm going to help you get to wherever you want to go as a leader. And I'm telling you that story to remind you that while sometimes it feels like we're doing this with our leaders in the business, or it feels like we're working and they're at cross purposes, you have leaders like Antoine. Every business has leaders like him. They're trying to do the right things. They're trying to enable their teams. And so it's up to us to make sure we're trying to bring people in. When we find those leaders, let's spotlight them. Let's celebrate them. Let's elevate their stories and tell others how they're doing it. Because you better believe the very next thing I did after I found out what he was doing is I started going to our other division heads saying, he's got a couple of things that are incredible. He's got a certain way of doing them. So you need to watch this and figure out how you can adapt that for your own purposes. But I was trying to bring some of those things he did into other areas, because he was creating this vision and laying the foundation so that when we came and said, here's the training, here are the opportunities, here are the career paths, people were willing and receptive and ready for that. We weren't trying to climb an uphill battle or fight an uphill battle, because he'd already laid the groundwork for us. So Antoine, I love his story. great example of a leader and someone who I still respect today. Speaking of the type of companies people want to work for, one of the questions we asked in that study was, what kind of company, if you could pick any company in the world, what would they be like? And there were some kind of not fake answers, but kind of red herrings in there where we said, I want to start a job and never leave it, right? All the way up to, I want to work for a company and change jobs and look for other cross-training opportunities, things like that. And the number one thing that came out of all the different choices we gave, all the different flavors on the development perspective, was I want to work for a company that gives me these experiences, pick up new skills. I don't want to be the same person and do the same thing 2 years from now that I'm doing today. And guess what? We have the opportunity to elevate that. We have the opportunity to impact that and to solve for that challenge that our learners are facing. They're looking for these opportunities. They're looking for these chances to be better and to do better and to do more. And we get a chance to help elevate those things. So I'm going to talk. I gave you that perspective from them so that you can understand what the people are thinking, what they're saying, because they might be saying it amongst themselves, but they're often not saying it to us as the leaders who actually have the opportunity to impact those things, which is frustrating because we have a chance to actually solve for some of the things that we're talking about here. So we actually have the chance to help them figure out these issues and close those skill gaps and understand what paths are there. And instead, they're kind of commiserating with each other, or they're entertaining calls from a recruiter when we have the chance to really connect with them. So I want to share their perspective so you have that foundation. We're going to go through now and talk about some of the things that we need to work on. Some of the challenges we saw in our technologies, some of the challenges we saw in our internal skills on our learning teams, the things that we need to focus on. And I'm actually going to ask you to respond here to a question, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat. But what skill gaps do you have in your internal learning team? It could be one of these options here. It could be something else that's wide open. F is fill in the blank, pick your own. I'd love to hear from you right now. What is preventing your team from being as effective as it needs to be in your organization? What is preventing you from being as effective as you want to be in serving the needs of your people and the needs of the business and what's going on there? All right. So I've got a learning analytics response from Maggie. Thomas said, experience design. Okay. David, e-learning content. Got it. Okay. Trish, learning analytics. Okay. A couple of those, analytics and measurements. I've got some really interesting data points to share with you in a minute on that one. Okay. Thanks, Shane. Awesome. Heidi. Got it. Okay. Good. So lots of good answers there. Clayton said, I can't pick one. I've got more than one. Absolutely. I'm with you on that. So some really good inputs there. I want to talk to you about some of these things. Ooh, Kimberly, good one. Lack of infrastructure to deliver training. That's an interesting one. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of these as we're going through here, share some of the stats with you, some of the data with you, and hit on some of those things because it might surprise you what you're going to see in this. So, consistency. There was another one that was popped in there. I could just sit here and just read all your answers for a long time, but I'll let you stay in there. And again, talk to each other. You've got a chance to do that as well. In addition to learning from me, you can learn from each other. If you've got something that's worked for you on experience design, as an example, or something that's worked for you from an analytics or a measurement perspective, share that out there. Say, hey, here's how we solve that problem, because people would appreciate that. One of the questions we asked in the study of learning leaders like you was, what are the skills that are important to the future of your team? What skills matter, not just now, not just in the past, but for the coming years ahead, for the whatever the world's going to throw at us next? What skills are important? And we saw in this, number one, was really being able to facilitate these virtual sessions. We learned that that's a skill unto itself. It's not the same as facilitating in person. And I'll tell you, I've been on a physical stage a few times in the last few weeks, and I've really enjoyed that thoroughly. I have missed that so much. And so it's been a lot of fun to be able to do that. But being able to do it virtually takes a different set of skills, a different set of tools as well. Learn technology, e-learning content. Someone just mentioned that a minute ago. Analytics. So all of these things that you just responded to, there's different levels of interest in those as priorities, but all those are priorities. All those do matter. All those are important. I'm going to ask you a quick riddle, actually, just to see if I can catch you. We have 4 kids. The oldest 2 are 11, and they love like riddles and word games and things like that. So I've enjoyed those all my life. And now I get to actually prey on them with some of those ideas, and it's been a ton of fun. So let me ask you a riddle. Let's say you're in a town 1,000 miles from anywhere and you need a haircut. So you go inside the barbershop and there are two people in there. One of them has neatly manicured hair, looks really nice. The other one has hair that looked like it was cut by a lawnmower. Which chair do you go sit in? I'll tell you the answer to this one, but you can't tell anybody. I told you the secret. You'd go sit in front of the person whose hair looks like it was cut by a lawnmower. As frightening as that might feel like, if they're 1,000 miles from anywhere, they're cutting each other's hair. So the one who looks really nice was cut by the person whose hair looks absolutely terrible. I tell you that story because we don't always see those other things, those other perspectives, and it gives us a chance to. We are the worst, I'll just say, at supporting the things that our internal teams need. That's why I'm asking about these skills, and I'll talk about some of the opportunities we have to develop those. Because when we think about solving a problem, we're like, well, we'll solve it for everybody else, and we'll take whatever's left. And I mentioned that earlier. And I have spent a lot of time the last year encouraging, because there's so much burnout and so much stress, and there's an abnormal amount, an outsized amount in the talent development space, because all of the things that have come in the last year have compressed all of us. And we've got to get more things done. We've got to support more needs. We've got 3 new types of channels we're now supporting, and all this new content we've got to create. It's easy to feel like you're on this treadmill. And so I share that story because we forget, like, we've got to focus on ourselves. We've got to take care of ourselves first. We got to make sure that we have the right things that we need. We got to make sure that we're taking the next right step, because otherwise we end up making a misstep. One of the skills that we have, I'll just say, can be a choke point. One of the great leadership teachers out there talks about how a team will never outgrow the leader. The skills, the capabilities, the expertise, the care, the compassion of a leader, the team will never exceed whatever that leader has. So as a company wants to grow, as a team wants to grow, including a learning team, as you want your team to excel and you want them to be the incredible performers they are, we've got to make sure that we're leveling up ourselves so we can allow them to do it as well. Okay, let's take I'm going to take a little sidetrack for 1 second and tell you about something that has been really intriguing in the data. Told you I've written a book on AI. I'm going to tell you a quick stat. We did a study about a year and a half ago, and we found something really interesting where we said, what skills matter? Kind of like the question I just asked you. We asked, what skills matter to you as a talent professional? And we found that there was 50% of them said things like communication skills and technology skills and analytical skills. About 50% said those are important, but 50% said they weren't. And I was flabbergasted. Why in the world would half of the people that responded to this, who were talent executives at enterprise companies, why would they say those things don't matter? So I started looking through the data, trying to figure this out, because I just could not rest until I understood this. And I actually cut the data by a question. And it said, do you think technology is going to change the work we do? Is it going to enable us to automate some of these things and be more efficient and streamlined so we can focus on other things? And if people said, yes, I believe technology will do that, then suddenly the number went through the roof. 70, 80, 90% said those skills mattered. But if you said, that's all hype, the technology is not really going to change anything, it's just a bunch of noise, then those people were much less likely to say those things matter. What you believe drives what you do next. So if you don't believe that the tools and technologies are going to help you, that they're not there to support you, they're not there to enable you, then you're not going to change your perspective and change the things that you're working on for yourself and for your team as well. I'm going to share with you a stat in a minute, or a story in a minute, from a chief learning officer friend of mine that helps to paint that picture really well. And I love it because he's in the trenches doing this every day in a healthcare organization. And he says, I don't want to spoil it, I'll tell you in just a minute. So I heard from several of you that said that measurement is a priority for you. It's a challenge, the gap that you have on your teams. And I want to encourage you here with this. One of the things we found in the data, so we have high performers who have better revenue, employee retention, and employee engagement, which are metrics that all of us would arguably love to have, right? So those organizations are high performers that have those better metrics. Those companies when they're looking at why they're creating, why they're serving up learning content, why people are taking and consuming learning content in those businesses, they said it's because we want people to develop these new skills. We want them to develop new capabilities to be able to solve new problems. Whereas the low performing company said, we've got a lot of mandatory stuff out there, a lot of mandatory content. There's nothing wrong with those things. We've got to be compliant. We've got to have ethics training. Those things do matter. But if that's the primary reason we're serving up content, we're missing a chance to really connect with people and to create better conversations around performance. On the measurement side, the big gap there was, if you're a low performer, you said the best way to measure this, the way we do it is satisfaction. Are you happy? Did you like it? Did it make you smile? Oh, goodness. There's nothing wrong inherently with saying, did someone like this? But if the only metric we're using is satisfaction and happiness, then we're missing a chance. I sometimes upset people with this, but I'll go ahead and lay it out there for you. My perspective is that learning is not about learning. Learning is not about engagement. Even though I'm talking about some of those things today, learning is about performance. It's about you helping every single one of your leaders and learners to perform better tomorrow than they do today. That is the root of what learning is all about. And if we're focused on just satisfaction or just happiness or just engagement, we're missing the chance to really elevate performance where it needs to be. The primary measurement, though, for a high-performing company said, we're going to close these skills gaps. We're going to make this relevant. We're going to make sure it solves the problems that our customers, the problems our customers have, our people are going to be able to solve those because we're developing them in a way to ensure that that's possible. So a couple different perspectives on things. You can see just what you believe is what you do. And that sort of thing plays out here. The kind of company you are, the kind of learning team you are, filters into the kind of ways, something as simple as how you measure or why you consume content filters into those kinds of decisions day to day. I think one of my last charts here I'll share with you. One of the things we asked about was gaps in learning technology. We said, in the last year, have you seen some sort of problem with the tools you were using? Because for a lot of companies, the things they were using didn't allow them to respond quickly enough to the changing demands of their people. An example that we wrote about recently was around diversity training and racial justice and those kinds of things that popped up. People didn't get a chance to. It was really hard to respond quickly and say, how do we develop this? Do we create this? Do we find a partner? How do we solve for this? Because it became a problem virtually overnight for many companies. So the learning gaps we'll solve from a technology perspective. How do we engage people? How do we connect with them in a virtual setting and make them feel like they're heard and they're listened to and they're appreciated and they're supported? How do we recreate that feeling? Which is interesting because the first one for a skill gap, if you remember, was facilitation in a virtual setting. So that virtual thing really popped up pretty heavily. The next one, though, was third-party content. How do we make sure we have the right partners alongside us to help us with those things? That was one of the intriguing things I saw in the data is when I was talking to an Open Sesame customer recently, they were telling me that they have all this content, but they're using it as a tool. We're going to talk about mobility in a minute. They have to use it as this tool where if someone's talking to their leader about an opportunity in the business, that leader can say, yes, you're ready for it, go. No, you're not ready for it, you have to stay. In the past, that was the only two choices they had, but now they have a third choice to say, no, you're not ready yet, but here's the options we're going to point you to, some good third-party content that we partner alongside to help you solve for those problems. So there's lots of really interesting things happening around those gaps. And I don't know if any of those showed up for you in your organization, but there's some examples of what we've seen in the data that other leaders are trying to face. I told you I was going to tell you this story here. Sometimes these things feel like they're the technology and the tools. You saw that as one of the options earlier. The technologies and the tools feel like they're happening here, and our work is in this stream over here. One of my good friends says all the time, this is not just a separate thing. This is an enabler of our performance as a team, as an organization, as a function from a learning perspective. This enables us to do those things we need to do. And we're seeing that increasingly in our data in all kinds of studies, by the way, in compensation and talent acquisition, all over the space. We're seeing more and more leaders say, this isn't just about having a vendor, a partner, but this is about they are enabling us to perform at the level we're performing at. And if I didn't have them, it'd be like going back to a rotary telephone, right? Or whatever metaphor you want to use for going back in time and losing some of the tools we have that have made us as capable and effective as we are today. I said that if I had to give this up, it's not just about losing that vendor or losing that service that I have access to. It's about I would no longer be as effective as a leader as I am today. So it's a performance enabler for some of those teams. And I would encourage you, if you don't think about it that way, take a moment today, make a note, think about how does that enable your performance as a team? Does it? If so, make note of that. Take stock of how that's enabling the performance of you and of your team. Because I think that's a really interesting perspective on things. And it allows us to think about this differently instead of feeling like we're at odds or they're just trying to get money out of us or whatever else. I've never talked to a vendor, I'll tell you, probably 300 plus a year. I've never talked to a vendor that said, we're here to mess them up, to make them unable to meet their goals, to make them unable to serve their people in the right ways. They're there to solve that problem from a different perspective and enable us to solve the problems we're trying to tackle. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Which of these, if I put you on the path and you had to pick one of these two options, which of these types of learning creates better company performance? Which one of these drives better performance for the organization? This is an actual question we asked in the data, and I'll tell you the answer and how people felt about that. I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these do you think creates a better outcome on the company side from a performance perspective? You guys are getting me here. Okay. Well, I was going to try to trip you up, and apparently I can't. You're a sharp audience. So the question we asked in the study, everybody, if you're not watching the chat, everybody's saying learner. Okay, learner wins, hands down. Oh, goodness. So Robert, Kelly, everybody else, thank you for chiming in there. Learner-driven training is interesting. So when we asked this question of a learning leader audience like yourselves in the survey, we said, which one of these is more important for company performance? Which one is more important for individual performance? And when we asked them that question, they could pick the same one for both, but they were more likely 700 out of the 1,000 companies said, well, company-driven training, like company-required, company-specified training drives better company performance, but learner-selected training, learner-driven training drives better learner engagement and performance, interestingly. And I say that because I was going to get you, and you got me because you answered the way that I feel is correct. We've been taught, for whatever reason, that it's an either or. It's a false dichotomy, that we've got to pick one of those two choices. And I made you pick a choice. We've been told that we had to pick one of those two things. We can create a learning experience that makes people happy and excited and engaged and makes them perform, but the company is never going to get any benefit out of it at all. Or the flip side, we're going to create something that makes the company lots of money and lots of ROI, but the people are going to hate every single minute of it. And I feel like that's a terrible choice. And when you put it that way, we all agree that's awful. We would never choose that intentionally. And yet it feels like we get pushed into one of those two molds. I want to tell you a quick story to tell you why that's not true. That's just to illustrate that really carefully. There is an organization, University of South Florida. Last year, they opened up this DEI training certificate to the public. Anyone can take this. It's totally free. We just want to open source this for anybody that wants some help with this right now. And they saw 100,000 people sign up for it. 100,000. No one made them. No one told them to. They voluntarily did this because they wanted to learn. Now, if we're taking this false dichotomy here, that's learner driven. That means that their companies, their families, their communities, none of them benefited from this, only that individual. And we know that's false. We know that's not true. Someone that develops a skill can take that skill and apply it in other places in their lives and make those situations, make those experiences, those relationships better. And so I use that story to help illustrate the idea that this doesn't have to be one or the other. We can create stuff, experiences, we can create learning journeys, we can create learning moments and opportunities, whatever term you use at your company. We can create those moments that get the person excited, that make them engaged, that also help the company perform and serve clients and customers in the ways that it should. Absolutely, we can do that. and absolutely should be doing that, not just for one outcome, but for all those outcomes. I love that. Okay. One last thing here, and then we're going to jump over to the last piece on mobility and ownership, because I think there's some interesting things to share with you there. There's a term in economics. I always thought I was going to be an econ professor if the whole HR training thing didn't work out for me. I love economics. I love Freakonomics. It's a podcast and all those kind of fun things. There's a term in economics called ceteris paribus. And it means if everything else is equal and I change this one variable, here's what will happen. I don't know if any of you live in that magical fairy world, fantasy world, where everything else stays the same when I change this one little knob over here and it all stays the same. But that's not the world that we live in. Right? When we change something, lots of things happen. Lots of things, some things we can foresee, some things that we can't foresee, like the story I started with today, when I fixed one problem and created an entirely different one. The research that we did, we asked learners about the companies that supported them. Did your company help you? Did they make you feel like you were welcomed and appreciated? Did they support you in your time of need? Did they make sure that your needs were met to the degree they could? We're not babysitters and social workers, but sometimes we're called to help in some ways. And those people that said, my company gave me the right learning opportunities, the right amount, the right types, they really supported me on the learning side in the middle of all this, were 3 times more likely to agree that their company supported them in the last year. So it's easy to feel like this, all the events, all the experiences in the last year, it seems to feel like those are siloed off and separate. Like that's happening over here in a vacuum. And oh yeah, training, which is our lives, right? But those things, as the data show, are connected, are linked. We have a chance to impact people's lives, not just the work, not just the things they're doing day to day, the tasks, but the lives that they're living. We get a chance to impact those things through how we're serving them from that perspective. Our last section here, and we'll wrap up. I saw one question come in a minute ago. I'll make sure and get to that one. If anybody else has a question about the data or how to solve something, whatever else, feel free to throw that in there in the Q&A, and I'll get to those in a little bit. We'll talk about employee mobility and ownership. I already shared a stat with you on this, but I'm going to share something else with you on actually how companies are solving for it, in case you're curious or you want to solve for this at your company, or you're trying to go down that path, because there's a lot of different perspectives on this. So we'll show you, I have 2 different audiences in this one, but one audience is L&D, the dark blue, and the other audience is actually talent acquisition. So people outside of your bubble, likely, that you may be friends with in the business, but you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to plan together and how to strategize together and how to solve problems. So I want to share with you what they're thinking about and how they're solving this, because the good news is, as a function, as a profession, learning is farther ahead. We're more mature. We're measuring more things. We're measuring more often. We're measuring more carefully, more comprehensively than our counterparts over in talent acquisition. So how are you solving this problem? How are you tackling the opportunity to move people inside the business? And we saw the number one way is, for us, is transparency. Let's help to illuminate the career paths, illuminate the opportunities, make people aware of those so they can kind of self-select into it and participate as they want to. But you see here, the way that talent acquisition is approaching it is different. Their biggest priority, let's use an internal marketplace. Let's use a place to put gigs and opportunities and other jobs inside the business. Let's make those visible that way. What's intriguing to me is you look at both of those, the commonality they have is transparency. We're already doing lots of things. Let's just make those apparent and open and obvious to our workforce and let them opt into it. Because we saw the very first stat I shared with you. Remember, this ownership is not just on us or on the employee, but there's a shared responsibility for how we make this work. And it's on us to make it visible, to give them the right tools, to give them a way to opt into those and a way to make sure they're ready for whatever that next step is. So there's different things here. You'll see that some of the talent acquisition ones don't have a counterpart on the learning side. Just like on theirs, I don't have a couple of them there. The questions I asked them didn't have to do with this around referrals, things like that. But I just want to share that with you, because in the last 10 years ago, all these discussions about mobility and moving people in the business were started by someone in learning. In the last 5 years, it started to shift towards HR and recruiting. In the last 2 years, it primarily has come from different recruiting leaders trying to figure out how to solve this problem. Again, they're kind of late to the party because you've already started it in many cases, but it's a chance to come together around a common goal of how do we create these opportunities to connect people inside the business. Because you remember the stat I gave you earlier, 88% of people would stay in a job if they saw some sort of opportunity ahead, if they saw some sort of opening and some sort of development, some sort of way to pursue the career they're looking for, they're more willing to stick around and stay. Share with you a couple of stats, some evidence to back that up, because the number one problem when I asked in the research, why aren't you doing this yet? Number one was we don't know how. And number two was we don't have the support, the culture, our managers, our leadership, they're not supportive. So I'm going to share with you a couple of stats really quick to build your business case if you need those. And then I'm going to wrap up and take a couple questions. So number one, the data we have shows that when you move someone inside the business, it's less risky. This is data coming from learning and talent development professionals, not just from Ben's opinion. There's some actual data that show this is less risky when we move someone inside the business because they already know our culture, our leadership, the ways we at work, that weird process we have for how we do our time cards. Like they know those kind of unique nuances about this business, and they don't have to learn something new or teach something new. It's less costly to reskill someone or develop them into a new role than it is to hire someone from outside the business. Wharton's data, the Wharton School of Business actually has some really interesting data points on this. One of the studies by Matthew Bidwell, who's a professor there, he found that when you hire someone from outside the business, on average, it costs up to 20% more to hire that person, and they perform worse on the job for the first 2 years they're there. After 2 years, it starts to kind of even out because they learn all those nuances and intricacies of the business. But for the first 2 years, they're performing worse and you're paying them more money. That's interesting. And last but not least, I4CP has a really great term they use to describe this. If you've ever worked for a manager that said, hey, you're not going over there because you're mine, I own you, you're my resource, you're my person, you're my teammate. Those managers, they call talent hoarders. And talent hoarders, if you have a lot of those in your organization, your company actually performs worse in terms of customer acquisition and revenue. It impacts the business, not just your people, but it impacts the business and your ability to execute on the things you're trying to do as an organization. So all those different things are great pieces of evidence to help you build your case that we should be developing people, moving them up inside the business and making this a priority instead of hoping that our managers are going to do that or hoping that it's just going to happen naturally, because it will not happen naturally. The thing you see here on screen, they're blueberries, but they are pink lemonade blueberries. Last year we planted these, and I'm super impatient, so I had to wait some more until finally they bloomed. And I don't normally love blueberries, but we had a little space and I wanted to plant some for the kids that they want a snack, go out and eat something right off the plant. And so we plant these blueberries, and they're sweet and they're delicious and they're so incredible. And what I love about this is blueberries take a long time to grow. That first year we planted them, not a single thing happened, not one. And then the next year we got some, and then this year we got even more. I share that because a few years ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, somewhere like that, one of the big pieces of advice for employers was you look for the best candidates and you sift through and you pick that person that has all the things you need them to have. The person that has the right skills, that has the right experience, that has the right cultural fit, whatever you want to say, all those things, let's find that person and pick them out of the pile. Today, companies don't have that luxury unless they have unlimited budgets. And a couple of companies seem to have unlimited budgets right now. But for most companies, it's let's pick the person that has the right attitude, that has the right interest, the focus, and let's develop those skills. That's playing the long game. Just like when I planted the blueberry bush, it's playing the long game, waiting for something good to come out of it. Companies are now having to lean into playing that long game when it comes to developing talent and getting the right people in the door. You can't just hope to hire them and snap your fingers and suddenly they're all ready to go. We've got to hire with the intent to develop and build and grow. One of my good friends is actually the head of talent acquisition for a global organization. She told me recently they posted these jobs and they didn't get really any candidates to apply. And then they adjusted the experience down a little bit with the expectation they were going to train on those gaps between the original posting and the new posting, train on those gaps. And they got enough applicants in that second posting to actually hire the right number of people for those openings she had, with the plans built into the hiring plan and onboarding plan to develop those people over time into what they really needed with those original job postings. And that is a story I'm hearing more and more, again, from your counterparts over in recruiting or over in HR. They're thinking about those kinds of things. So I want to share with you and encourage you that as the world's kind of, it's a wild place right now, but the work you're doing is serving a really critical need. It's enabling your company to deliver on the things that it's promised to its customers. But you're also, that's valuable, that's important, but it's way more fun to say you're also enabling the people to develop the right skills to serve in those roles they're in, to build this career for themselves, to achieve whatever dreams and goals they have for themselves from a career perspective. You have all those kind of things together. You're enabling those in a fairly powerful way. So I wanted to share all those things with you. If you want to ping me, I mentioned earlier, I have that letter that Antoine gives to new hires. You want to shoot me a note, I'd be happy to share that with you as an example. If you want to see that infographic I mentioned with some of the other data points I didn't share today on how your learners can be supported and how we can be doing a better job of those things, I have to share that with you. Whatever I can do, we've got other research that's just coming out on this great reportization that I can expose you to and look at what people want in their work based on their age, based on their gender, all these other kinds of demographics, things like that. And I'm going to go ahead and open up Paige. I told you I was going to do this, but I'm going to actually pop it open really quick in the Q&A because I saw a question come in from Maggie really quick I want to address. And if you have a question as well, everyone, feel free to throw that in there while we're doing this. So Maggie asked the question, what is the best way to measure better performance and report that out to business leaders? Great question. We have a masterclass on this if we wanted to. I have a great friend, Kevin M. Yates, actually, who this is all he does. And I believe now he's at Facebook, but he's a measurement guy in the learning space. So I encourage you to look him up on LinkedIn, just follow him. He's super sharp and he shares a lot on this. But the best way to measure performance and report that out from a learning perspective is really understanding what that goal is, what the intended outcome is. If we're developing a training course or again, a learning journey, all the different ways we reference this, figuring out what we want that outcome to look like, and then working backwards from there. There's a really interesting concept called backward integrated design. And I use it to talk about performance practices in a lot of companies when we're advising employers on that, because we think for a lot of us, we measure, I'll give you an example, performance in terms of, did people complete their form? Did they complete the process? And if they did, we say, great, we've achieved our goals. But the goal of any performance process is never to complete the forms. The stated goal is we want to improve performance. We want to elevate someone's abilities. We want to enable them to be their best selves at work. And so I would encourage you to think about this through that lens of what sort of outcome are we trying to get to. When we want someone's performance to be better, is that we want them to make more phone calls. We want them to mentor more people. We want them to complete this number of tasks. We want them to, whatever it is, figure out what those outcomes are, and then measure against whether you're hitting those kinds of goals. Begin with the end in mind, as Franklin Covey always said, and that will allow you to do that. I'll admit to you that the problem I've had in the past when it comes to measurement is I get halfway into something and say, okay, how am I going to measure when I'm done if this was successful or not? And by the time you're that deep, it's too hard to go back and start over and baseline and figure out what you're comparing against and the other kinds of things there. So really good question, Maggie, and I hope that helps you in what you're working on. And I think that was the only other one I had. Awesome. Okay. If there's no other questions, Paige, we're going to turn it back over to you to help wrap us up.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ben. That was fantastic. And thank you all of the attendees for your engagement. Really, really wonderful questions and comments throughout. Reminder, we will be sending some of the research that Ben has been talking about, as well as this recording after the fact. And on behalf of Open Sesame, eLearning Brothers, and Lighthouse, thank you all for your attendance this morning and have a fantastic rest of your day.